Hello there everybody. I have been flying the F-4 recently quite a bit, and I've tried to learn as many of its systems as I can. But while learning and researching, I have hit a wall when it comes to the offset delivery mode. There hasn't really been many videos explaining how to use it and where it's useful in, so I will take that upon myself today. The offset delivery is mainly used for bad weather or all weather situations where you either can't see your target, it's very hidden between mountains for example, or just cloud coverage, rain, whatever you can imagine. And this is where it really shines. The offset bombing mode does have a couple of downsides. It is not the most accurate bomb delivery mode. You will not be able to hit one single tank with it. Pretty unlikely. In my testing, I have found that you will probably hit inside of a 500-foot radius, but that is still very precise for if you want to hit airfields or like a hideout, a structure with a couple of infantry around it. This will definitely be a very useful mode for that. And on top of that, if you have a squadron of people and you fly in formation and you all drop bombs together, you will be much more likely to hit something on the ground, especially when you strike a airfield or stuff. So, how do we actually use the offset mode? What does it actually allow us to do? Alright, the offset mode is nothing else than a INS, a assisted guidance towards a target, and we pre-plan that guidance into the computer before we take off or while we fly. And how are we gonna program that in? The whole point of the offset mode is to find an identification point. You might have seen that already in the manual. It is talking about INS, WRCS, the weapons release control set. That's where we're gonna punch the numbers in, and the radar. The INS is key to all of this. The INS has to be enabled, but it doesn't matter if it has already drifted or not. This mode is pretty drift resistant, and you will see why in a second. But everything is revolving around the identification point. The identification point is nothing else than something you find on the map, a geographical location, a TACAN station, an island in the sea, whatever fits your liking, the Giza pyramids. You will just have to be able to identify it as a pilot. And the offset is nothing else than us taking the ruler and measuring the true heading. In this case it's 066, not magnetic, and the distance to target, 12.6 miles. And this is what our computer will use to guide us to the target. In essence, we are doing kind of this. If we apply this offset, we are gonna apply the northing and easting into our computer as an offset, so it will have a new coordinate to steer us to, basically like a new waypoint. But because we just before we typed in this waypoint basically flew over a real position in space, we now negated the drift, because however drifted your INS is already, as long as it doesn't drift too much while you do the attack run, the drift is negligible. So you can basically find your identification point, and from this point the offset will be applied in the computer, so we don't have to worry about too much about the drift. So what actually does finding the identification point mean? Finding the identification point is nothing else than either visually confirming the identification point and making sure to fly over it, or using the air to ground radar to use it. So now that we have talked a bit about the offset mode and how we actually use it, I'm gonna show you what to actually do. In the front seat, there's not much to do. Go to air to ground, arm your bombs, go to bombs, select the offset mode, desired quantity, desired release interval, and that's pretty much what you need to do. Turn on the flight computer, flight director, and that's everything now we gotta do in the front seat. Depending on mission type, you might have a TACAN station. This guy's obviously you have to enable the TACAN station and make sure you flip your flight computer to TACAN. And after you overflew TACAN and you got your identification point, you have to change back to your navigational computer to get the right steering information. Now to the back seat. In the back seat, if you are planning to use your radar to identify the IP, you gotta switch to PPI, wide or narrow. You have to be in map mode. It usually pays off to put the pulse to short to get a clear image of the ground. Make sure obviously your radar is turned on, and usually you want to be below 25 miles to get a decent enough picture on the scope. You have two knobs for increasing cursor brightness and offset brightness. Those are the two cursors for up, down, left and right. And most of the magic starts to happen over here in this computer. So if you pull back out your bombing table and make sure you have your run-in speed, your run-in altitude, your distance from IP to target and the bearing all set, then you will have three new calculated values at the bottom, and obviously your target altitude, which you have acquired beforehand, and you will want to dial those numbers into the WRCS. And this panel at the back is everything we will need to control the radar to make the lock happen and start the whole target run. Some people will already have seen the nice color-coded stuff. Most of it is not too important. The northing, the blue circle, is just for putting in the northing. Just make sure to round it to the closest number because you have to divide by 100. The distance in easting, same, not too hard, and the target altitude as well. The somewhat important part, or stuff people might overlook, is the release range that you have to set to. In this example, because we're flying a bit high and a bit fast, our release range is outside the range of our selector. And Jester, if you would tell Jester those numbers and you would Jester type in the numbers, he would max out the range at 999 and you would not get the right range. But luckily up top we have a switch that changes the default times 10 multiplication of the range to times 100, so we are now able to input a way bigger range of release ranges. Now, after we've put in all the pre-calculated parameters from our identification point to target into our WRCS, now comes the next step, and that is acquiring the IP. We can acquire the IP by pressing the freeze button and afterwards apply the offset with the target insert. And this is what will give us the steering information and everything in the pilot seat to get us going. And this would be everything we have to do in the backseat as the Rio. But the hard part now actually is getting the IP right. Because if we press the freeze button right now, the aircraft system will freeze this position where we are at right now, and it will draw the offset from this position. But because we are obviously not on top of the island, we will not end up dropping our bombs on top of the target. So this is one way how we could acquire the IP, by directly flying over it, freezing our location and time to calculate the offset in the space we press the button in. So we overfly, we press the button, and now we have all the time in the world to do calculations and insert our target to get the steering going. Or the second way how to actually insert the steering is with the air-to-ground radar. We have two little steering knobs right next to the insert and target insert button, and those are used to move the cursor of the radar now in the air-to-ground mode to let us select a point in space, in this case exactly where the radar cursor is, to freeze in this location instead of right on top of our aircraft. You can always reset with the reset button. And now let's see if we can find the island in front of us. It should be 2 miles in front of us. Who knows where this is on this graph. This might be right, this thing up front. Ugh, everything is killing me. Not doing too great finding this island. Definitely not doing too great. Oh, there it is. And now freeze. And now the location of this island is where we have froze, and from where all those offset calculations will be applied. But because our plane also knows where we are in relation to this radar log, it can basically do two calculations and basically give us the steering information from us to target now, so we don't have to overfly the identification point. I'm gonna overfly the identification point anyways, just because it is a bit more accurate to give us a little test run and see how all of this works in practice. Now to the practice run. So in the front seat we have setup controls, air to ground, bombs armed, offset selected. In the back seat, before we took off, we have calculated the parameters we have to put into the WRCS to get the right steering from IP to target. And now everything left to do is for us as a pilot or as the RIO to acquire the IP and follow steering information to drop the bombs. Like I said earlier, we're gonna overfly the IP to acquire it this time. I have bound the freeze button, so I don't have to go back into the back seat. I will freeze it now. And if we see in the back seat, it has frozen, and now we need to do is either use the time to punch in the offset or just insert the target, because we have pre-calculated all those already. And now in the front seat, what we will see is already steering cues in the HUD, steering cues down in compass and flight computer, and down here some steering information as well. And now all we have to do is fly our attack profile as pre-planned. In this case it's at 4,000 feet at 500 knots. So we are gonna climb a bit. At this point you could completely fly heads down with the instruments, but you are definitely allowed to use visual clues if you can see the target to steer more left or more right to get a better result. We're a bit fast, we are pretty much on altitude. The bomb should drop any second. There they go. We have targeted the middle of the runway just by this oil tanker in between taxiway and runway. Let's see how we actually hit. Oh, a little offset, but only by a couple of feet. I found by testing it's usually around 500 feet the radius where you're gonna hit. It's just a limitation of how accurately you can acquire the IP and the calculations, and on top of that the INS system in this plane is not the most accurate. Yeah, and this is how to use the offset bombing mode, and there's not much more to talk about it. There is only one more feature that is kind of nifty in the F-4, and that is you can use this offset mode to steer your targeting pod right on top wherever you want. So we're gonna freeze our plane midair here for a second, and we're gonna, let's see, go to the target find mode in this case to steer our targeting pod to wherever we want. We're gonna select the TV, adjust brightness and contrast a bit, just out of habit. And now what we do, we're gonna use the offset calculations again and the offset mode in the back seat to actually accomplish this. So now, what do we actually do to get our targeting pod to slew onto where we want it to? We are obviously going to select our targeting pod. We are making sure it doesn't look to 12 vis or 9 vis. We're going to make it slew to what the WRCS is going to say it. And now what we have to do is, most likely you're going to use the F10 map while you fly. Your aircraft's going to fly, and while you overfly a point, you're going to press the freeze button. And from this point, you're going to measure the distance and bearing to target, and we're going to do the calculations again. After we did those calculations, we are going to punch in the numbers. It's north 61, west 151, and the bombing information and release range doesn't really matter in this case, only target altitude would be important as well. So after we have entered how to close the manual, that's the big question. And if you have entered those targets, we can use the target insert button again to make our targeting pod slew over to where we want it to. Basically, you could self-correct yourself or see if you did a great job with acquiring the target for offset mode, but unfortunately if you change mode between target find and offset in the front seat, all the calculations will be erased and you will not be able to use them anymore. But this is a cool way to make your targeting pod to slew to anywhere you want to and make it easier to acquire targets visually. Now we have pretty much exhausted everything I know, but there's one last thing I want to share with you, and that is how to make use of TACAN stations to get a rough location of enemy targets. This heavily depends on your calculations and distance from the TACAN station to you and back to target. We can use the example we've just seen earlier. We have our TACAN station on the island down here, and we have our plane, in this case, down here. We know the offset A realistically from inside our aircraft because we can enable TACAN and we can infer the magnetic heading and a rough distance. That is why this mode is not quite as accurate. The distance to target is hard to estimate. And with this, we can calculate an offset from us to the TACAN station. This in itself wouldn't do that much unless you want to bomb a enemy TACAN station, because right now all that we could do is steer us towards this TACAN station. But because this TACAN station is our identification point as well, we know how far it is from our identification point to target. And now we have two offsets. And those two offsets we can actually combine and get a new offset that will accurately give us steering information from our aircraft towards enemy now. In this case, I called it offset C. And it is pretty simple, and why it works is pretty simple too. If we look at this graph to what is happening below the hood, if you press the freeze button and you look at the dials of the TACAN, right now we will see we have a magnetic heading of 339. We will have to convert this to true headings, so know your magnetic offset for the maps. In this case, it was 344 true heading, and it was roughly 4.5 miles what I could read off this dial, but in DCS itself, it was closer to 4.35 miles. So this is why this option is not quite as accurate, but it is definitely helpful for navigation. So we now know our offset A, we have calculated that. We have the feet in northing and the easting westing, and we plot this on this graph. So this will give us the IP's location from us. But now, because we already know the location of the target from the IP, we can just add those numbers on top of our numbers. And all we have to do is add north to north from A and B and add west and east together. And this is how we will get the new numbers that we need to enter into our WRCS to get the new offsets C. It's as easy as adding those numbers. There's only one thing to keep in mind. If the numbers go left or down on the graph, they are negative. So in this case, west is negative 7,500. And all the other numbers, because they are right or above of the chart, they're going to be positive. And that's how you're going to know in your results if you have to dial north or south or east or west. And it's as simple as knowing those two numbers. You're already pre-calculated offset from IP to target, and now with a little bit help of our TACAN needles, the offset from U to the IP. I call it the TACAN triangulation. I kind of like that word. And this is the most complicated system I have come up with to actually target a target. But to be fair, it is not that accurate and definitely more useful for running in with loads of friends, bombing a whole airfield instead of maybe a factory complex or even something smaller.